Revenant Rebirth, a thought-provoking and gripping novel that explores the mysteries of reincarnation and the afterlife. Follow our protagonist on a journey of self-discovery and unexpected revelations that will leave you speechless. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating content. Chapter 1: The Awakening. As I opened my eyes, I felt a sharp pain in my head. I groaned and rubbed my temples, trying to shake off the dizziness. I looked around, and everything felt unfamiliar. The room was dimly lit, and the air smelled musty. I sat up and looked at my hands, which were strange and foreign to me. "What the hell is going on?" I muttered to myself. I couldn't remember anything before waking up in this room. It was like my entire past had been erased. I stumbled out of bed and made my way to the door. I turned the knob, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. I stepped into the hallway, which was equally dimly lit. The walls were peeling, and the floor creaked under my feet. As I walked down the hallway, I heard muffled voices coming from one of the rooms. I crept closer and listened in. "I don't know what to do," a woman's voice said. "He's not supposed to remember anything. He'll adjust," a man's voice replied. "He always does." Adjust to what? Remember what? I had so many questions, but I didn't know who to ask. I continued down the hallway until I reached a staircase. I descended the stairs and found myself in a large foyer. It was more brightly lit than the rest of the house, but it was just as decrepit. I heard footsteps approaching and turned to see the man from the room. He was tall and had a stern expression. "Who are you?" I asked him. He gave me a quizzical look. "You don't remember?" "I remember nothing," I said. He sighed. "You're one of us. A revenant. You've been reincarnated into a new body. What does that even mean?" I asked, feeling even more confused. "It means that you've been given a second chance at life," he said. "But it also means that you're a part of something bigger than yourself. You have a purpose, and it's up to you to figure out what that purpose is." The man's words sent chills down my spine. What kind of purpose could I have in this strange new world? Chapter 2: The Academy. The man led me through the foyer and into a large room filled with people. They all looked at me with curious eyes, as if I were some kind of spectacle. "This is our academy," the man said, gesturing around the room. "It's where we train new revenants and teach them how to fulfill their purpose." I looked around the room and saw people of all ages, races, and genders. They were all dressed in the same black uniforms, and they all had the same solemn expression on their faces. "We'll start your training tomorrow," the man said. "But for now, you should rest. You've had a long day." He led me to a small room with a bed and a dresser. "This is where you'll be staying," he said. "Make yourself at home." As he left the room, I sat on the bed and tried to process everything that had happened to me. Reincarnated into a new body? A purpose? What did any of it mean? I was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I got up and decided to explore the academy. Maybe I could find some answers. I walked down the hallway and came across a room filled with books. I picked one up and read the title, "The History of Revenants." I flipped through the pages and saw illustrations of people being reborn into new bodies. As I read, I heard footsteps approaching. I turned around and saw a girl my age. She had long brown hair and piercing green eyes. "You must be the new guy," she said, smiling. "I'm Lily. I don't remember my name," I said. "That's okay," she said. "We'll help you remember." We spent the next few hours talking and exploring the academy together. Lily showed me the training rooms, the dining hall, and the courtyard. I felt like I was starting to get the hang of things. But just as I was starting to feel comfortable, something unexpected happened. Chapter 3: The Betrayal. As Lily and I were walking through the courtyard, we heard a loud explosion coming from the other side of the academy. We ran towards the sound and saw a group of people gathered around a burning building. "What's going on?" I asked one of the people. "It's the archives," he said, his face filled with horror. "Someone set it on fire." I looked around and saw that everyone was in a state of panic. Some were trying to put out the flames, while others were frantically searching for something. "What are they looking for?" I asked Lily. "The book," she said. "The book that contains the secrets of our purpose." Before I could ask any more questions, I saw the man who had greeted me when I first arrived. He was yelling orders at the other revenants, trying to get them to focus. "We need to find the traitor," he said. "Someone in this academy is responsible for this." As he spoke, I saw Lily's expression change. It was like a switch had been flipped, and she went from being calm and collected to being full of rage. "I know who did it," she said, her voice shaking. "It was him." She pointed at me. Everyone turned to look at me, and I felt like the ground had opened up beneath me. Betrayal? Me? How could Lily accuse me of something like that? "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're lying," Lily spat. "I saw you reading the book earlier. You must have wanted to destroy it." I couldn't believe what was happening. One minute, I was starting to feel like I belonged, and the next, I was being accused of something I didn't do. The man who had greeted me stepped forward. "Take him to the interrogation room," he said. "We'll get to the bottom of this." As two revenants grabbed me by the arms and dragged me away, I felt like my entire world was crumbling. I didn't know who to trust or what was going to happen to me. Chapter 4: The Interrogation. I was thrown into a small room with a table and 2 chairs. The walls were plain and gray, and there were no windows. The only source of light was a dim bulb in the ceiling. A few minutes later, the man who had greeted me walked in. He sat down across from me and folded his hands on the table. "Let's get one thing straight," he said. "I don't believe for a second that you had nothing to do with the fire." "I didn't," I said, my voice shaking. "Then why were you reading the book?" he asked. "I was curious," I said. "I didn't know what it was." He leaned forward. "Don't play games with me," he said. "We both know that book contains the secrets of our purpose. And we both know that someone who wants to destroy our way of life would want to get their hands on it." "I didn't want to destroy anything," I said. "I don't even know what my purpose is supposed to be." He sat back in his chair and looked at me for a long moment. "I believe you," he said finally. "But that doesn't mean you're off the hook." "What do you mean?" I asked. "There's a way we can prove your innocence," he said. "We'll give you a test. If you pass, we'll know you had nothing to do with the fire." "What kind of test?" "You'll see," he said. "But I warn you, it's not easy." He stood up and walked to the door. "We'll start tomorrow," he said. "In the meantime, think about your actions and their consequences." As he left the room, I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. What kind of test was he talking about? And what would happen if I failed it? Chapter 5: The Test. The next day, I was brought to a large room with a maze-like structure built in the middle of it. It was made of metal and looked like a complicated puzzle. This is the test, the man who had greeted me said. You have to navigate through the maze and find the end. That's it? I asked. That doesn't seem too hard. Ah, but there's a catch, he said with a smirk. The maze is filled with traps and obstacles. Some will try to kill you. Some will try to distract you. And some will try to confuse you. He handed me a small device that looked like a wristwatch. This will track your progress, he said. If you reach the end of the maze, it will deactivate the traps and unlock the exit. But if you fail to reach the end within the time limit, you'll be trapped inside forever. I swallowed hard. This was no ordinary test, but I had no choice. If I wanted to prove my innocence, I had to do it. I entered the maze, and immediately I was met with a confusing array of paths and dead ends. I tried to keep track of where I was going, but the maze seemed to be changing constantly. At one point, I found myself in a room with 3 doors. Each one had a sign above it, but the signs were written in a language I didn't understand. I had to choose one, but I had no idea which one was the right one. I closed my eyes and tried to focus. I remembered what the man had said about actions and consequences. I had to make the right choice. I chose the door on the left. It led me to a room filled with water. I had to swim to the other side to continue. As I made my way through the maze, I encountered more and more obstacles. Some were physical, like walls and barriers. Others were mental, like puzzles and riddles. But I didn't give up. I kept moving forward, determined to reach the end. And finally, after what felt like hours, I saw a faint light in the distance. I ran towards it, and it led me to a small room with a pedestal in the middle. On top of the pedestal was a small crystal. I took the crystal and put it in the device the man had given me. The device beeped, and the traps in the maze deactivated. I had passed the test. I walked out of the maze, feeling exhausted but triumphant. The man who had greeted me was waiting outside. Impressive, he said, nodding. You passed. I apologize for doubting you. It's okay, I said, breathing heavily. Can I go now? Yes, he said. But remember, there are always consequences to our actions. Choose wisely. I nodded and left the building, feeling relieved and bewildered. What kind of organization was this? And what was their purpose? And why had they chosen me? Chapter 6, The Informant. After passing the test, I was released from the organization's custody. But I knew that my problems were far from over. I still had no idea who had framed me for the murder, or why. I spent the next few days trying to gather information. I visited the bar where the murder had taken place, but the bartender was uncooperative. He seemed scared, like he knew more than he was letting on. Then, I received a mysterious message on my phone. It was from an anonymous number, and it simply said, "Meet me at the park at midnight." I didn't know who it was, but I was desperate for answers. So that night, I went to the park and waited. After a few minutes, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, with long dark hair and piercing blue eyes. "I have information for you," she said, in a voice that was both soft and commanding. "But you have to trust me." I hesitated. I had learned the hard way that trust could be dangerous, but I had no other leads. "Okay," I said. "What do you know?" She told me that she was an informant, with connections to the criminal underworld. She had heard rumors about a powerful figure who was behind the murder. "It wasn't just some random killing," she said. "It was a message, and you were the messenger." I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" She explained that the victim had been involved in a dangerous game. one that involved a lot of money and even more risk. The person who had killed him was trying to send a message to the others in the game, and they had used me to do it.
But who would do that? I asked. And why me? That's what I'm trying to find out,
she said.
But you have to be careful. The people behind this are dangerous. They'll stop at nothing to protect their secrets.
I nodded, feeling overwhelmed, but also relieved. Finally, I had a lead and a possible ally.
Thank you,
I said.
Can I contact you again?
She nodded.
Here's my number,
she said, handing me a slip of paper.
But be careful and watch your back.
With that, she disappeared back into the shadows. I stood there for a moment, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. This was just the beginning. Chapter 7: The Game. The informant's words haunted me for days. Who had used me as a pawn in their twisted game? And why? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in danger, that someone was watching my every move. I decided to dig deeper into the victim's background, hoping to find some clues. I visited his apartment, which had been sealed off by the police. I managed to sneak in and search through his things. What I found was shocking. The victim had a secret room, hidden behind a bookcase. Inside, I found stacks of cash, along with various weapons and passports. It was clear that he had been involved in some kind of illegal activity. But what was even more surprising was the list I found, with names and numbers scribbled on it. It looked like a roster for some kind of underground game, and my name was on it. I realized that the informant was right. I had been used as a pawn in this dangerous game, without even realizing it. And now, I was a target. I decided to confront the people behind the game. I went to the address listed on the roster, a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of the city. When I arrived, I found a group of men gathered around a table, playing some kind of card game. They looked up when I entered, their expressions cold and calculating.
"What do you want?"
one of them asked.
"I want answers,"
I said, my voice shaking.
"Why was my name on that list? What game are you playing?"
The men exchanged a look, then burst out laughing.
"You're just a pawn,"
one of them said, sneering.
"Ain't nobody. You should feel honored that we even let you play."
I felt a surge of anger, then fear. These were not people to mess with. But I couldn't back down now.
"I want out,"
I said.
"Take my name off the list. I don't want anything to do with this."
The men laughed again.
"You don't get out,"
one of them said.
"Not unless you pay the price."
With that, they surrounded me. I braced myself for a fight, but before anything could happen, there was a sudden commotion outside. The men froze, then scrambled to their feet.
"Cops!"
one of them shouted. I took advantage of the distraction and bolted for the door. As I ran out of the warehouse, I heard gunshots and shouting behind me. I didn't stop until I was far away, back in the safety of my apartment. But I knew that the game was far from over, and I had a feeling that things were about to get even more dangerous. Chapter 8: The Revelation. I spent the next few days in a constant state of fear. Every time I heard a noise outside, I jumped. Every time my phone rang, I hesitated before answering. But despite my terror, I knew I couldn't just hide away forever. I needed to find out who was behind the game, and why they had targeted me. My first step was to visit the informant. I needed to know if he had any more information that could help me. When I arrived at our usual meeting spot, I found him sitting alone, staring off into the distance. He looked up when I approached, but his expression was blank.
"Are you okay?"
I asked. He shook his head.
"They got to me,"
he said, his voice barely above a whisper.
They threatened my family. I had to tell them everything.
My heart sank. I had lost my only source of information. But then I remembered something he had said to me before. Something that had seemed insignificant at the time.
He mentioned a name,
I said, thinking back to our conversation.
A woman's name. Do you remember it?
The informant looked up, his eyes narrowing in thought.
Yes,
he said after a moment.
I think it was Elena. Yes, Elena.
I thanked him and left, my mind racing. Who was Elena? And why had she been mentioned in connection with the game? I spent the next few days trying to track her down. It wasn't easy, but eventually I found her. She was a powerful businesswoman, with connections to some of the most dangerous people in the city. I knew I was taking a huge risk by approaching her, but I had no other choice. I arranged a meeting with her, hoping that she would be willing to help me. When I arrived at her office, I was surprised to find that she was expecting me. She greeted me with a cold smile, her eyes glinting with amusement.
I've been waiting for you,
she said.
I knew you would come eventually.
I took a deep breath, trying to keep my nerves under control.
I want to know about the game,
I said.
Why was my name on that list? Who is behind it?
Elena leaned back in her chair, studying me with interest.
You're a curious one,
she said.
But you're also a liability. You know too much.
With that, she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a gun. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. But before she could do anything, there was a sudden explosion of noise outside. Shouting, gunshots, the sound of glass breaking. Elena looked up, her expression changing from amusement to confusion.
What the hell is going on?
She muttered. I didn't wait to find out. I bolted out of the room and into the chaos outside. As I ran down the street, I heard someone calling my name. I turned to see a familiar face, someone I never thought I would see again.
Jason?
I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his expression serious.
We need to talk.
Chapter 9, The Betrayal. I followed Jason through the streets, my mind racing with questions. How had he found me? And more importantly, could I trust him? We ended up in a rundown apartment building on the outskirts of the city. Jason led me up to a small, cluttered apartment on the top floor.
Sit down,
he said, gesturing to a rickety chair.
We have a lot to talk about.
I hesitated, still unsure if I could trust him, but something in his expression told me that he was telling the truth. So I sat down and waited for him to speak.
I was hired to find you,
he said bluntly,
by the people who are behind the game.
My heart sank. I had hoped that he was there to help me, but it seemed that I had been wrong.
Why did you come here then? I asked.
Jason hesitated before answering.
Because I don't want to be a part of this anymore,
he said.
I've seen what they're capable of. I don't want to be a part of it.
I wasn't sure if I believed him, but I decided to hear him out.
What do you know? I asked.
He leaned forward, his eyes intense.
I know who's behind the game,
he said.
It's a group of wealthy businessmen, all connected to Elena. They're using the game to eliminate their enemies and consolidate their power.
I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This was bigger than I had ever imagined.
What do they want with me? I asked.
Jason shrugged.
I don't know,
he said.
But I think they're using you as a pawn in their game. They want you to do something for them.
I shook my head, trying to make sense of everything.
What can I do?
I asked.
I'm just one person.
Jason leaned back, his expression thoughtful.
There might be a way to stop them.
he said slowly.
But it's risky, and it involves you playing the game.
I frowned.
What do you mean?
Jason looked at me gravely.
You need to win the game,
he said.
You need to find out what they want from you, and then use that information to bring them down.
I hesitated. It was a dangerous plan, but it was the only one I had.
Okay,
I said finally.
What do I need to do?
Jason smiled grimly.
First, we need to get you back into the game, and then we need to make sure you win.
Chapter 10. The Final Showdown. I knew I had to do this. I had to win the game and take down the people who were responsible for all of this. Jason helped me get back into the game, and I started playing again. This time, I played with a fierce determination, knowing that everything was at stake. As I played, I started to notice things that I had missed before, little clues that pointed to the true nature of the game. I used this information to my advantage, outsmarting my opponents and rising through the ranks. Soon, I found myself face to face with Elena herself. She looked at me with a cold smile, and I knew that this was it. The final showdown. We played for what felt like hours, the tension mounting with each passing moment. Finally, I saw an opening and made my move. Elena's expression shifted from confidence to shock as I beat her at her own game. For a moment, there was silence. And then, suddenly, chaos erupted. The other players started to scream and shout, and Elena stood up, her face twisted with rage.
You can't do this,
she yelled.
You can't beat me.
But it was too late. The game was over, and I had won. And with my victory came the truth. The truth about the game, about Elena, and about the people who were behind it all. Jason and I worked quickly to gather evidence and expose the truth to the world. It was a dangerous task, but we were determined. And in the end, we succeeded. The people responsible for the game were brought to justice, and the world was changed forever. But for me, the biggest change was internal. I had discovered a strength and a determination that I never knew I had. And I knew that I would never be the same again. Chapter 11. The Aftermath. After the game was exposed and the people responsible were brought to justice, life started to return to normal. But for me, the aftermath was far from over. I struggled to come to terms with what had happened, and the fact that my life had been manipulated and controlled for so long. I had trusted the wrong people, and it had nearly cost me everything. But through it all, I had Jason by my side. He had been my rock throughout the entire ordeal, and I knew that I could always count on him. As the weeks passed, I started to rebuild my life. I went back to work, and slowly but surely, things started to fall into place. But there was one thing that still bothered me. I had never discovered who had brought me back to life. I had a second chance, but I didn't know why or how. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something I was missing. And then, one day, it all clicked into place. I was sitting in my living room, lost in thought, when I saw a familiar face on the news. It was the doctor who had declared me dead all those years ago. And then, I remembered something that he had said. He had told my parents that there was a chance that I could come back. But how could that be possible? I had been dead. And then it hit me. The doctor had been involved in the game. He had brought me back to life as a pawn in the twisted game that he and Elena had created. I felt sick to my stomach, but I also felt a sense of closure. I finally knew the truth about everything that had happened. I picked up my phone and called Jason.
I know who brought me back,
I said.
It was the doctor.
Jason was silent for a moment. And then he said,
We need to do something about this.
And so we did. We gathered evidence and brought the doctor to justice. It wasn't easy, but in the end, we succeeded. And with that, I finally felt like I could move on. I had closure, and I had a second chance at life. But most importantly, I had Jason by my side. Chapter 12. Moving forward. After everything that had happened, I knew that I needed to take some time for myself. I needed to heal, and to figure out what I wanted out of life. Jason had been there for me every step of the way, but I needed to do this on my own. I took a leave of absence from work and spent my days reflecting and exploring my passions. One of those passions was writing. I had always loved to write, but I had never pursued it seriously. But now, I found myself pouring my heart and soul onto the page. I wrote about my experiences, about the game, and about the people who had been involved. But I also wrote about hope and resilience. I wrote about the power of second chances. Eventually, I had enough material for a book. I had never thought of myself as a writer, but now, I knew that this was what I was meant to do. With Jason's help, I found a literary agent and secured a publishing deal. My book was a success, and it resonated with people all over the world. But the most important thing was that it had helped me to heal. Writing had given me a way to process everything that had happened and to turn it into something positive. As time passed, I started to feel more like myself again. I went back to work, but this time, I approached it with a new sense of purpose. I had a newfound appreciation for life and for the people in it. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. Jason asked me to marry him. I was overjoyed, and I knew without a doubt that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. We got married in a small ceremony with our closest friends and family. It was a beautiful day, and it marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. Looking back on everything that had happened, I knew that I had been given a second chance. A chance to live a life that I loved, surrounded by people who cared about me. And as I looked into Jason's eyes, I knew that I had made the right choice. Life was full of unexpected twists and turns, but I was ready to face whatever came my way. Chapter 13. The Final Twist. Life was good. Jason and I were happy together, and my book continued to be successful. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I had this nagging sense that there was still something I hadn't figured out. So, I started to dig deeper, looking for any clues or information that I might have missed. And then, one day, I found it. A piece of information that changed everything. It turned out that the game I had played, the game that had led me to my reincarnation, had been created by a group of scientists who were experimenting with human consciousness. They had designed the game to see if they could transfer a person's consciousness into a new body. And it had worked, at least in my case. But there was a catch. The new body wasn't really mine. It was a clone, created specifically for the experiment. I was stunned. How could this be? How could I have been reincarnated into a body that wasn't even real? As I delved deeper into the research, I discovered that the clone bodies were designed to break down after a certain amount of time. And once they did, the consciousness would be lost forever. I was horrified. This meant that I only had a limited amount of time left to live, and there was nothing I could do about it. But then, something unexpected happened. The scientists who had created the game contacted me. They had been watching my progress and were impressed with how I had handled the situation. They offered me a chance to help them. They wanted me to work with them to find a way to transfer consciousness into a real, human body. It was a risky proposition, but I knew that I had to try. I couldn't let anyone else go through what I had gone through. So, I accepted their offer and began working with them. It was a long and difficult process, but eventually we succeeded. We were able to transfer consciousness into a real, human body. It was a breakthrough, and it would change the world forever. As for me, I was given the opportunity to transfer my consciousness into a real body. It was scary, but it was also exciting. I had a chance to live a real life with all its ups and downs. And so, I took the leap. I said goodbye to my cloned body and transferred my consciousness into a real, human body. It was a strange sensation, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin, the wind in my hair. But it was also exhilarating. I had been given a second chance, and this time, I wasn't going to waste it. As I looked around at my new body and my new life, I knew that there would be challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them. After all, I had already been through so much. And as I took my first steps in my new body, I knew that this was where I was meant to be. The final twist had led me here, to a place of hope and possibility. Chapter 14, Epilogue. It's been 5 years since I transferred my consciousness into a real body. In that time, I've learned to navigate the ups and downs of human life. I've fallen in love, had my heart broken, and made new friends. I've even written a new book, based on my experiences. But there's something that still nags at me. The scientists who created the game and experimented on me are still out there somewhere. I don't know if they're still conducting experiments, or if they've moved on to something else entirely. Part of me wants to track them down and confront them, to demand answers and hold them accountable for what they did to me. But another part of me is afraid of what I might find. Maybe it's best to leave the past in the past and focus on the present. After all, I have a new life now, and I'm grateful for it. But there's one thing I know for sure. Reincarnation is real, and it's not always what it seems. It's a complex, mysterious phenomenon that we may never fully understand. And yet, despite the risks and uncertainties, I wouldn't change a thing. My journey has led me to where I am now, and for that, I am grateful. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to stay up to date on the latest captivating stories.